I had a little bit of the Corona little piece in me. Not something to joke around about, but was an interesting couple days fighting through the flu part of it, but feeling much better
you
now.
Had the virus? You had the
look,
virus?
to get a test in New York State is an impossibility. So to know whether that's what it was, I
Right.
had the fever, I had the sweats, the chills,
Oh
everything that
boy.
goes along with that. So I'd like to believe it was that, so that I got it out of my system, and now I'm immune
Yeah,
to it,
totally.
hopefully. But we'll see if that comes to fruition.
Wow. All right. Well, listen, I'm powering through that and hopping on with us. We've got people
Of course,
tuning in
man.
already. So what I'll do throughout this is certainly take people's comments, questions. I made this public so everybody watching can share it. But I'm pumped, man. I am so excited. I've been looking forward to this really all week. And first and foremost, I just want to thank you. And I've told everybody that I've spoken to, you're a busy man. And I appreciate you taking time out during your busy schedule, even though you're not at events and live in meetings. I know you're on the phone a lot, making calls and doing a lot of these live stream events. So thank you so much. Everybody in my network is very lucky to have you.
Oh, of
So
course.
what I prepared is kind of, I purposely kept it kind of short. And the reason why is I want everybody to hear your story from you, your mission from you. But when I was writing this out earlier, being the writer that I am, the author that I am, I'm going to read this because I don't want to mess it up, but it sounds like a movie. It really does. And I would not be surprised if one day your story, your mission does not become a movie. So I want to preface that for everybody when I read this right now and officially kind of intro Eric here. This is definitely a movie trailer, but it's real life. That's the amazing piece about this. So again, purposely wanted to keep this short, give Eric a quick intro. But really, I'm going to what had an extremely successful career that started at the NBA league office and led to senior management positions with a number of professional sports teams. Then out of nowhere, Eric's mental health took a sudden and rapid decline. Due to unresolved personal life traumas he failed to appropriately address at a younger age, life experiences he was unaware were affecting his mental health. Once he found a way to climb out of his abyss, he vowed to spend the rest of his life focused on changing the global conversation through mental health. Now, through his Same Here mental health global movement, he is helping thousands of people with their mental health across the world. So powerful, powerful few sentences there. And this is real life, like I said, even though to everybody tuning in right now, it does sound like, again, I read a movie trailer. This is Eric Kussin's life here. So I would love to, and I have a rough agenda, so we'll kind of go through that as we chat. But first and foremost, I'm so excited for everybody to hear your story and how your story transitioned to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've told this story, so many different ways. So please cut me off in the middle if I go too long on any portion of it, or
No.
you have questions and you wanna chime in somewhere. But yeah, you mentioned I worked in professional sports for 15 years, and that was my dream job coming out of college. Went to school at Cornell University, got my first job right out of school with the NBA league office, and that kind of parlayed into other positions now working professional sports teams. So was in Chicago with the startup WNBA franchise, then to Phoenix with the Suns when Shaq and Amari were there and Steve Nash, over to New Jersey with the Devils, where we made a run in 2012 to the Stanley Cup final. Unfortunately, don't have a ring because we lost in the finals. And then I got an opportunity to go down to Florida to go work for the Florida Panthers as a new ownership group came in and took over the franchise. And two of us were hired pretty early on, a guy named Matt Caldwell, who's still down there as the CEO. And then I was hired as their CRO, their chief revenue officer. And so my ultimate goal working in professional sports was to run a franchise, to be that CEO spot. And so at a young age, as 33 at the time, I felt like I was in a great place to position myself for the next step in my career. But this was where I was going to focus my energy and attention at the time. And about 6 months into my tenure there, I just started to lose interest in things outside of the office. And, it was things like not wanting to go to the gym, not wanting to go on dates, not wanting to see friends, not wanting to watch games on TV. And I think a lot of people, what they do when they start to lose interest in things, maybe it doesn't happen as quickly as it did with me, where everything gets taken away at once, but little things here or there, and their thought process is, oh, I'm busy, life is taking on more and more, my work is taking on greater responsibility, this is the world's way of telling me I need to work even more. And so that's what I did. I put my nose to the ground, and for the next 2 weeks I just kept coming into the office, working even harder. And that excuse for this being work related and something that I needed to focus even more attention on, that only lasted for about that 2 week period, at which point I remember waking up one morning and it was like pushing myself out of a bed of quicksand to get out of bed. And I walked over to my little bit of space that I had in Florida, a lot more than New York, to my closet. And I felt like I had cinder blocks on my feet. And, I get in the closet and I look around and everything just looks like a mishmash of clothes and I can't figure out what I'm supposed to pick out. And when your brain starts to fail you that way, you start to really question yourself and you test yourself. And so remember the first test that I gave myself was there were these two pictures of my nieces, Rebecca and Kaylee, on my counter, my dresser. And I asked myself, what are their middle names? And I couldn't think of their middle names. And that the interesting thing about mental health is you're like on a hamster wheel. The more things don't connect, the more you get anxious. Then the more you start losing cognitive abilities. Then the more you stress more, and it's this vicious cycle that continues. So I forced myself into the office that day. I go in, and the way I describe it to people was, my computer was overlooking the rest of the staff that was out there, and I felt like looking at my computer, it looked like an old game of light brights that we all grew up with. So everything was just like sparkly coming in, couldn't make out any of the emails that were coming through. And then as people were checking in, hey Eric, can we have you at this meeting? Can we get your opinion on this particular decision we're making? I was coming up with excuses saying, listen, I'm on the other line. I've got another conference call. I got to be on another call in a little bit. And I was doing everything I could to just tread water while I was in the office. And that night we had a prospecting suite, something we did pretty often, where we would invite prospects in, and as chief revenue officer, you're there to sell the organization to people, not in a salesman-y type of way, but in a genuine type of way. This is the direction that we're going in. This is the players that we have that are joining the team. This is the direction that the ownership is taking the franchise, and that stuff usually comes directly from the heart, and you don't have to think much about that. And I remember as people were piling into the suite, I just was looking down at the floor thinking, there is nothing coming to my mind right now. My mind is completely blank. I can't say anything right now. And I turned to my team president. I said, you got to take this over right now. I'm going to walk out. You got to see what you can do in terms of holding down the fort. And so he did his thing. And after the game was over, I found him and my team owner, who's gotten a lot of great press recently in the last week, a guy named Vinny Viola. Vinny's background is that he's a West Point grad. And so he had purchased the team right around the time I started working for them. And so when I told him something's going on, I don't know if it's this mental health thing that people are talking about. I don't know if it's something else, if I have a head trauma or if I have a brain tumor, but I just know I'm not the best version of myself right now. And I need to do something to start feeling better. And so he looked me in the eyes, and it's probably the closest I'll ever feel to being a member of the military. He said, Eric, we never leave a soldier out on the battlefield. Take as much time as you need, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, come back, hit the ground running. And so when I heard 3 months as that, largest amount of time that I'd have available, longest amount of time I'd have available to come back, I did, growing up, we didn't learn about mental health in school. We learned one chapter in a health textbook in junior high or in high school that said erroneously that depression means sadness, that anxiety means nervousness, and that PTSD is for servicemen and women. That's all we knew. Yeah. So the little bit of mental health education that I did get was from these commercials that I had watched. And these commercials, big pharma promotes directly to us. So I had seen these commercials say things like, you go from, this cartoon of a sad face with a gray cloud above you, 15 seconds in, you take this pill, beautiful music starts, and now you start to feel better, and you've got a smiley face and the sun is shining and birds are chirping. So what does an antibiotic sound like? It sounds like antidepressant. And so if you're used to taking antibiotics when you feel sick, when you're younger, when you have strep throat or bronchitis, why wouldn't you think when you're feeling sick, even if it's mental health, you take this thing called an antidepressant, and that's going to knock it out of your system. The anti, it's going to go against what's working negatively in your body, move it out of your system, and you're going to feel better. So with the support of the ownership group and thinking that 3 months was an eternity, there's no way I won't get back from this. I came back to New York and I went to go where I had the safe haven, because I'm paying for rent in Florida. That's not, inexpensive. So I go back to my parents' house, which is in Merrick, Long Island, and the twin bed that I still had in my room at 6'4", and I lay down in that bed thinking that I'll go to doctors and I'll start feeling better once I start taking these magic pills that they'll give me. And I left the first appointment that I went to with what was called a psychopharmacologist, which is a step above a psychiatrist in terms of how they mix medications. And I left that first appointment with 5 prescriptions. And so, what was said to me was, you're dealing with a ton of shit. You need heavy artillery, which in his mind was heavy amount of drugs to knock this out of your system. And what am I to think at that point? I listen to what he says. And so I start taking those drugs. And that led me on a course of 2.5 years of basically being horizontal to the world. So I was laying in that bed, staring at the ceiling, waking up each morning with no interest in watching TV, no interest in listening to the radio, no interest in seeing family members or my nieces, and basically just waiting for each day to end as my mind just circled with all these thoughts of, when is this ever going to be over? And that was the only thing I could focus on. And that lasted for 2.5 years, where I tried over 50 different psychotropic drug combinations. None of those worked. And so then the next doctor I saw said I should try, a little bit more of a radical procedure, something that they call TMS therapy, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation. And they put this electromagnetic field above your head. It looks like a half moon shape. And they shoot these waves into your brain to try and wake up your neurons to get firing again. And so I did that for 23 sessions for 23 days, no insurance, pretty expensive. And on the 23rd day, I couldn't fall asleep that night. So I didn't go in for the procedure the next day. Doctor says to try and sleep it off. Another night goes by, I don't fall asleep. And finally, that next morning, so now we're going on 2 nights of no sleep, I developed the first ever concept that I've ever had of what's called a suicidal ideation. And for those who've never felt the suicidal ideation, I think erroneously what we think about with suicide in this society, we think something sad happened to this person. They broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, or their pet died, or someone in their family passed away. That can certainly be an impetus to it. But for me, it was 2.5 years of dealing with this that had built up inside me. We'll talk about what that stuff is that built up inside me. And I started looking at this bottle of pills that were on my counter. And the only thought that was running through my head on repeat, like a record, was swallow that bottle, swallow that bottle, swallow that bottle. And for those people who don't understand ideations, don't understand that someone could walk in front of a train and have a train hit them. When your brain gets to that level where the irrational thoughts take over, it's like a magnetic pull towards those things. So my body was being pulled magnetically towards these pills, while at the same time, fortunately, I had the wherewithal in the back of my mind. I remember sitting on my hands on my bed saying, I can't do this. What are you doing, Eric? Why would you possibly think about doing this? So I was fortunate. Again, I was around family, and I reached out to them, and we went to Cornell Med in the city, and I voluntarily checked into, a scary term to say, a psych ward. And skipping over a lot of the details of the misery of the psych ward experience, but I go and I meet with the attending psychiatrist there, who's supposed to be one of the top doctors in the Northeast. And she looks at my chart, looks back up at me, and she says, wow, Eric, 2.5 years, you look like you've tried everything that there is, which was true, in some cases. But in other cases, what followed that is something that I never want to hear any patient ever have to hear again, whether it's physical health or mental health. And she said, since you've tried everything, your last resort is to do ECT shock therapy. So ECT standing for electroconvulsive therapy, where they put they put wires on your brain and literally shock your brain into seizure to try to wake it up, essentially. And people, when I tell that story, they think that I'm referring to the ECT shock therapy that I don't want anyone ever hear. That wasn't the issue to me. The issue to me was hearing, this is your last resort, because I don't think anyone ever should be told that if they're willing to fight for their life. Any of us would be willing to eat dirt off the ground if it meant there's minerals in it that got us better. But me that's all I knew at that point. And so I took this doctor's recommendation, and I go and I do 12 sessions over 5 weeks of the shock therapy. They put you under general anesthesia, and these electrodes that they put on your brain shock your brain into the seizure, trying to get it essentially to restart. It's almost like a hard reboot of a computer. And I leave the hospital after those 5 weeks feeling no better than I had in the previous 2.5 years before that. So my mother and father are both retired school teachers, and they go to a continuing education course where a woman is teaching what's called integrative breathing practices. I never heard the term integrative before. I didn't know what it referred to. So they go up to the woman after the class. She says that she deals with people who've dealt with chronic pain and mental health complications. Right away, they go up and they ask if she would be willing to meet with me. She's open to it. So I go and meet her in her office, in her house, basement of her house, about 3 days later. And I sit down on her couch. And the first thing that she says to me is, Eric, I want to ask you a question. And whereas all the previous questions that I had gotten for all the doctors I had met with the 2.5 years prior were things like, Eric, what are your symptoms? And then based on the symptoms, they would say, here's how we could treat you. Her first question was, Eric, can you tell me about your life? And very broad and open like that, not like, can you tell me about your relationship with your parents? I want to dive deep into that. It was just, tell me about your life. So, I'm the middle of three boys. We're a sports crazed family. We love watching sports. We love playing sports. I played sports in college. So, okay, well, tell me about your older brother. And that was really how the story played out in terms of me talking with her. It wasn't like I thought to let me start with my brother. This was her line of questioning. And so, the background is my older brother from the time I was 9 years old and he was 13. At 9 is when you're really starting to form your strongest memories. So this is some of the earliest things. Of course, I have some memories before that, but really the concrete memories. So he broke his femur bone in a sporting accident, which is the largest bone in your body. He was in a body cast for a year and homeschooled. Heals from that, and a month later gets diagnosed with ALL, a children's form of leukemia. So has 5 years of chemo and radiation. Back then, they had to have a much longer treatment cycle. Miraculously goes into remission, doing well. A month later, he's driving with his friends in an open Jeep Wrangler where they didn't have seatbelts in the back. Friends doing what kids do at that age, and they're driving their car erratically, trying to test the car and see what kind of sporting shocks it's got on it. And the car loses control. My brother flies out of the back of the Jeep, lands on his head on the Meadowbrook Parkway, loses partial vision in his eye, and is in ICU for a month. Heals from that, goes to college, living a typical college career. A little bit late into his career, he starts feeling a pain in his knee. They do some sports medicine testing. Everything comes back fine. So they do some blood tests, and they find out that the leukemia has come back. So now it's many years later, after him getting it the first time, they have to give him a much stronger chemo regimen to try and knock it out of his system. So they do that, and his body just starts breaking down from more and more chemo that's building up inside of him. And I remember one day getting a call from my parents. He had 105 fever, brought him into the hospital. They found that his body, from all the rigor of the chemo, was going into septic shock, where your organs start attacking themselves, and his body fell into a coma at that point. So he's in a coma now. He stays in that coma for 3 months. My parents are essentially living at the hospital. The neurologist can't tell us if he's going to wake, or if he does wake, if he's going to have any brain activity. Finally wakes, and from the rigor of the septic shock now, his kidneys have failed. And so even though he's got he's got his faculties about him, he's able to think and talk and interact with us, he's got to go on dialysis. So he goes on dialysis. We all get tested to see who's the closest match. My father is, so my father and him go under the knife at the same time. The transplant is successful. Again, finally think I'm in the clear. A month after that surgery, I get the first call that one of my friends, age 29 years old, passes away of a heart condition. Unexpected. Well, the course of that next year, 2 other friends, so 3 in total, pass away of heart conditions in that 3-year period. So I'm telling this story to this woman, and she's sitting on the couch, and her jaw's dropped as she's hearing it, and she says, Eric, Is there anything else you want to tell me that's happened to you in your life growing up? And my immediate reaction was, what do you mean, what's happened to me? Like, this didn't happen to me. It happened to my brother. It happened to my friends. This stuff didn't happen to me. And obviously, looking back on that, that's a very naive comment to make. But what she said was, listen, you're a sports executive. Let me put it to you in sports terms. You had a front row seat for all these life events taking place. And if you had a front row seat for a basketball game, these big 7-foot guys are running up and down the court and they're sweating and they're diving after loose balls. And as they're running up and down the court and sweating, some of the sweat is hitting you because you're in the courtside seat and your clothes are getting sweaty from all the stuff that's going on. Well, now picture that instead of watching a basketball game from that front row seat, you're watching the game of life take place. And all these things that are happening with your brother, all these things that are happening with your friends, what the game that they're participating in, that the game of life, is like a wrestling match, and it's a muddy wrestling match. And every time a move is being made, that mud is splattering on you and it's hitting you and it's hitting you and it's hitting you. And unlike you going to sporting events that you normally go do, that you work at, or that you go to as a fan, where you get up and you go home and you shower and you go to work the next day, what you were doing by watching these events over and over again, you didn't know to get up and do what you need to do, which is shower the things that happen from what you experienced off your body. So this mud that was building up inside of you is building in your brain, it was building in your body, it was really, it was caking on your system, and you were doing nothing about it because you didn't know to do anything about it. And so, my immediate reaction to her, the diagnosis that she gave me, was PTSD. And she said, the experiences that I had watching my brother and my friends go through this was very similar to patients that she had treated who had friends who were in 9/11, who had women who were in the sex slave trade, people who'd lived through natural disasters and watched friends perish in that. And so, no, PTSD is not exclusively for servicemen and women. PTSD can be for anyone. And so my first reaction when hearing that was, okay, forget about my situation for a second. The divorce of parents, the breakup of parents, job losses, sickness of loved ones, loss of loved ones, watching someone being bullied, cyberbullied, being verbally abused by a boss, hearing about a friend being sexually abused, yourself being sexually abused or verbally abused, is like, you look at all those situations, and those are just maybe 10 or 15 that I just listed there. There's probably a list of 200 of them. There's not a person in this world who skates through life without having one or some of those experiences happening to them. So if these things affected my mental health that you're describing with my brother and my friends, who the hell has a life where mental health isn't impacted? And she kind of looked at me and smiled, and she said, look, I practice in an integrative world where we like to get to the source of why people are feeling what they're feeling. I feel that way. Unfortunately, our society doesn't look at mental health that way. And I appreciate that you're thinking that way, but let's get you healthy first before you start thinking about other people and how you're going to help them. So I appreciated that. She sends me to this weekend breathing course where I go Friday, Saturday, Sunday for about 7 hours at a time. And I show up. It's an old karate studio. I'm the only one who's male, only one who's under 40 at the time, and only one born in this country. So it's me and 8 Indian women and 9 yoga mats. And I feel like a fish out of water. But what I learned during this time period is this isn't necessarily how they explain it, but I'm a big science geek and I love learning about why our system works the way that it does. Essentially, our breathing and the way that we breathe based on how we see events and expect events to happen in our lives, that impacts this nerve in our neck called our vagus nerve that goes all the way from up here all the way down to our stomach, largest nerve in our body. And that nerve sends messages to the rest of our body of what's going on. So if I'm living through a life where the phone is always ringing and something bad is always happening, I'm not breathing properly. I'm breathing like if I saw a car crash through a door in the middle of a room that I was in on the first floor of a building, I would go like this and I'd stop breathing. Well, I was essentially doing that over and over again without consciously realizing it. And so by learning these breathing practices, learning these movements during these breathing practices, what I was doing was I was sending messages through that vagus nerve and the rest of my body, chill out, it's okay. The next shoe is not going to necessarily drop just because it has in the past, and you're going to get over this. And so I did that practice for 3 days with that group. And then I promised them I would do it for 40 days straight coming home 45 minutes a day. And about 30 days into doing that practice, I remember waking up one morning and, like, instead of just laying in the bed staring at that ceiling, I looked up at the TV, and the thought of, wow, like, I'm interested in what's on TV right now. This is amazing, came in my head. And the thought of, I want to have scrambled eggs for breakfast instead of pancakes, came in my head. And this is amazing. And people take that for granted, that these are things that happen to us every day. And we think of it as just ho hum, that's what life is. And we don't realize that it's a miracle that those things register in our mind. So for me, it was incredible to get those feelings back again. Well, I take what comes from feeling better, and I decide I'm going to write my story. And writing my story, I wasn't a social media person, so I write
Eric,
it on.
This is the crescendo here. I just want to make sure everybody, we've got real quickly. I just want to say hi to everybody that's watching. We've got quite a few people. Jason, Gordon, Ivan, Lori, Andrea, John, Meredith, Mrs. Ganji, Brian, Patra, David, Tracy, Andrew, Darlene. We got a lot of people on right now. I just want to set everybody up. Really, this is the powerful piece. I've got some follow-up questions from Eric's story that he's just kind of talked to you about. But this is it, guys. So I did want to just say hi to everybody. This part's really powerful. So sorry, Eric. I just wanted to throw that in there and say hi to everybody.
Hello to everyone as well. How you doing? So I, this is before the age of Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan and people in sports putting their stories out there. So I didn't really have a template or a platform of how to share. So I wrote my story up on a Word document, and the only two social media vehicles I had were LinkedIn and Facebook. And at the time, LinkedIn didn't have any character limits, so I did the things that I knew how to do. I'd never posted much, so I just listed my story, which took 35 minutes to read, up on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And I put my personal telephone number in there, thinking, how many people could actually read this thing? I'll get some reads, and the people that I'll help, it'll feel good to help, and something good will come from this. And so LinkedIn obviously tracks a lot more than Facebook does in terms of giving you numbers. It's a work site, so it makes sense. So it gets read 150,000 times in the first 3 days. But the bigger number was that, might sound smaller when you think about it, but to me, personal connection goes a long way. I had over 400 calls in 2 weeks that came in from as far as China, that I'm tracking in an Excel spreadsheet and trying to get back to all these people as I'm erasing my voicemail box and allowing more people to call in and leave messages. And what I noticed on those calls is, it sounds like a hyperbole, but like, there was no mention of disorder on any of those calls. No one was calling me and saying, Eric, I have PTSD also, or Eric, I have bipolar and it looks like this. Eric, I have anxiety, generalized anxiety. It wasn't like that. Everyone was sharing a life experience and a life challenge that they had been through. And then based on that life experience or life challenge, a description of symptoms that they were feeling that sounded somewhat similar, maybe not to the same severity, of what I had been through. So I give two examples when I share this of the extremes of what people deal with. One example was a couple called me and said that they lost their child to SIDS 5 years ago, sudden infant death syndrome, and they've never been the same for the last 5 years. Well, I can't think of anything worse than losing a child, right? So put that in the category of a traumatic life event that someone couldn't deal with. Now you take a completely other situation. There was a 32-year-old woman called me. Obviously, we'll keep her name private. Married, 2 kids, said she had beautiful, handsome husband, white picket fence, all the financial security they could want. She didn't need to work a day in her life, but she wakes up every day, because they got married at 25. So they've been married for 7 years. And she's got a pit in the middle of her stomach because she broke up with her college boyfriend senior year of college. And even though she loves her husband to death, she doesn't know if she made the right life decision for her. And so what that made me think of is, look at how much we obsess and perseverate about thoughts that bother us, that we might not get to the source of, we might not deal with, that bring us to that same place where we have symptoms that the person who goes through a traumatic event goes through. So we sometimes bring the trauma to us based on how we obsess over things, maybe our fear of getting on an airplane and how often we think about that, all the way to actually the loss of a loved one, watching someone perish in a major accident, dealing with someone who's got a terminal illness. And so when I realized that that was the feedback that I was getting on all these calls, I was at a career crossroads at this point. I was thinking, okay, I was one step away from my dream job. Do I go back to sports and chase this opportunity to be a team president, or do I go into this mental health space and try and do something here? And so my thought was, look, if there's already people in the mental health space that are doing great things where I can just lend some of the help that I can provide, like relationships with athletes or relationships with larger brands in the sports world, let me do that and let me help amplify their message. I don't need to recreate the wheel. So I go, and I'm not going to mention the names of the organizations, but people can do the research on their own. I look at the largest nonprofits, the largest government agencies in the mental health space, and I start noticing that there's three common threads that come about on all of their websites, all of their communication vehicles. This is nothing against the programming that they provide. This is all about the message that is attempting to get through to people, to get people to think about mental health. That in my mind, all three of these things are actually moving our society further away from understanding what mental health is and actually getting help. So factor number one, or pillar number one, or observation number one was they all use the stat at the beginning: 1 in 5 people have mental illness. 1 in 5 people is 48 million people in this country. That's a lot of people. The flip side to that is how I think of it as a marketer is, well, what are we telling the other 4 out of 5 people, the 80% of the population?
Yep.
We're telling them, you're okay, healthy, fine, normal. Don't worry about it, since you're not in this 1 in 5 mentally ill group. And oh, by the way, since articles are written where mental health and mental illness are interchangeably used, the majority of our society thinks what mental health is having depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD. So if I don't have one of those things, I'm not in this category. Mental health is not a topic for me. That was problem number one. Problem number two was all the campaigns for these nonprofits and these government agencies, they followed the same formula. They were copies of one another. So it was an action word followed by stigma. So stop the stigma, stomp the stigma, erase the stigma. I found that problematic because if it's coming from a group, there are people behind that group. So if it was Jason and Eric Incorporated telling the rest of the world, stop the stigma, stomp the stigma, erase the stigma, it's the two of us telling everyone else out there who's creating the stigma that you need to stop, stomp, and erase it. So we can't take away the fact that there is a direct correlation of the message that comes from these agencies and from these businesses, that they're telling other people that they're doing the wrong thing. I've never seen a social cause in the history of my lifetime for 40 years where you split people into two groups. You say to one group, you're doing something wrong to these people, and all of a sudden things get fixed and get better. We don't go into the bullies in schoolyard and say, hey, bully, stop being a bully, and that changes them from being a bully. That doesn't work. I go back to what worked in cancer with my brother, that the campaign that brought everyone together around cancer was everyone knows someone affected. And so to me, it was, we needed a collaborative message that brought people in the same boat together. Okay, so that was pillar number two. Pillar number three, which was problematic, was because there weren't a lot of celebrities talking about it at this time. It was still the middle of 2017. It was just around the point where Kevin Love started sharing his story and DeMar DeRozan started sharing his story. The majority of the celebrity shares were people like Britney Spears, Meta World Peace, Lindsay Lohan, Charlie Sheen. And so what did these nonprofits do? They linked to the articles of Us, Weekly and People Magazine, where there are these salacious stories written about these celebrities. And it wasn't at the direction of these nonprofits. They were just happy to see that those celebrities associated with those labels. So Britney Spears has depression. See, anyone can get depression. The problem is the way that the stories were written, it was the celebrity plus the disorder name plus some form of erratic behavior. So Britney Spears has depression, shaves her head. Lindsay Lohan has anxiety. She's a hot mess. Kevin Love has panic attack, runs off the basketball court. Well, in the context of 1 in 5 people, in the context of stop stigmatizing them, when you're hearing the examples of what those 1 in 5 people are, or that they're shaving their heads, running off basketball courts and dressing like hot messes, that doesn't make the rest of society understand what mental health really is. Having a difficult time waking up in the morning, feeling like a dry mouth and like you can't actually move out of bed, having a foggy brain, not being able to think clearly in a meeting, falling asleep at your desk because you are physically and mentally exhausted at the same time. All of these things, and they're not registering to people because they're thinking that mental health is mental illness. So that was the impetus for forming the naming convention, which started off as a 501c3 of we're all a little crazy. And I needed to use a word like crazy to jar people a little bit, because if you use mental health, mental wellness, you blend in with everyone else, and there's no way to get through that clutter. So crazy, we were very specific that there was quotes around the crazy, showing that we're using it in a facetious way, that we're making fun of the word normal because we're all a little bit of this crazy because life impacts all of us. From there, then the idea was, can we get people of influence? And this is where I had the relationships with some of the athletes and was able to get the ball rolling with that, where I could get the athletes not sharing their disorder label, although if they want to, they certainly can, but sharing a story about challenge that they face that has affected their mental health in some way. And that became a much easier ask for people. So I could get a celebrity to share that they went through a difficult divorce themselves or watching their parents go through it, that they grew up in a single family household, single parent household, that they were a foster child, that they lost their cousin to a gunfight when they were much younger, that they had a cousin that was terminally ill with cancer that they lost at a very young age. You know, the list goes on and on and on, and there's zero shame in sharing those stories. But the campaign that came from that was based on American Sign Language, which you see on my screen right there, is same here. So same here like this, it's your thumb pointed at your chest, your middle finger curled like a fist, and the pinky pointed out at someone else. That if there's a visual way for us to show, doesn't matter if you live in Argentina, doesn't matter if you live in Indonesia, doesn't matter if you live in the US, this is something that's recognizable in every picture, however you dress, however old you are, whatever you look like, that we all have a story. And those stories are what ties us together, so that this topic is not about 1 in 5 people who are mentally ill. It's about the 5 in 5 people, all of whom face challenges. All of us are part of the same group. And if we can all share stories like you did with your book, you know what, that's going to normalize the conversation. And I won't go into like the programming stuff because I know that you'll have questions and stuff like that, but the one thing I want to end on is saying there's all these campaigns out there attempting to squash the stigma, stomp the stigma, stuff like that. And you look in Canada and you see things like Bell's Let's Talk or Talk Mental Health or just talk campaigns. We cannot get to where these campaigns work. A talk campaign does not work. Talk mental health does not work unless you establish the baseline understanding amongst everyone that every single person in this world deals with mental health challenges across a continuum. Because if you don't establish that as a baseline, then what everyone thinks of during these talk campaigns is that's the day, the week, the month of the year when those people who are dealing with stuff, they're allowed to talk. And if that's what the underlying understanding stays, we will never come together as a society about this and actually get rid of that stigma that those campaigns are talking about.
Unbelievable story, and thank you so much for sharing. I do have a couple follow-up questions, and we do have quite a few people tuning in. So comment if you've got questions for Eric along the way, please. We're just getting comments just about how powerful your story is, how inspiring the story is. But the one thing I want to talk about, Eric, and get your perspective, because I think it's important, and I don't know if it's always highlighted. I've watched a lot of interviews with you. And I know you, and I've heard your story, which is fascinating every time. For people that know me, I normally can't just sit still and listen to somebody. It's just not who I am. But when you tell that story, I'm again, just kind of all ears, just all listening. But you talked about going to your boss at work. All right, I want to backtrack. And in my opinion, that takes so much courage to do that. Now, whether it's something that you were going through at the time, or maybe to your point, your brother, people out there are going through different things. Maybe directly they're having different feelings, emotions. Again, they could be dealing with the family member or relative. How would you coach somebody, or how did you build up the courage in that state that you were at that time to feel comfortable going to your boss? And I'm sure you had a relationship, and not everybody may have a great rapport or a great relationship with their supervisor. what do you say to people that are going through things and they just say, you know what, I cannot let the cat out of the bag. I cannot let my boss know because they're going to think that I'm less responsible, which we know that that's
Yeah,
not true.
You're giving me more credit than I deserve, only because I had reached such a breaking point that I had no choice in the matter. Like, it literally felt like I was falling apart in the office. So I no longer had the cognitive ability to literally come in and face that day to day. Like it was as if my brain had failed me, and even to the point of like not knowing where to walk for the bathroom. Like, that's how messed up my brain was at the time. But it's fascinating that you asked the question, because it, again, in the spirit of anonymity, I had a friend of a friend call me the other day. This is 2 days ago. They're a doctor, and they have history of mental health challenges. They're not a mental health practitioner. They're a doctor in a hospital, and they're talking with their superior about not coming in, not because they're fearful of getting COVID, although there is that fear factor of that, but because of the fear that's surrounding everything that's going on right now. Their mental health is in such a place right now that they can't bring themselves to go in the office without feeling that force field that I was describing, that magnetic pull, where that magnetic pull is actually pushing them away. It's almost a magnetic pull in the opposite direction from going in. And so it was a guy. The gentleman said to me at the time, he said, Eric, I could lose my job if I don't go in. Number one, Eric, I could be responsible for people's lives being lost. Number two, if I don't go in. And what I said to him was, your life is more important than your job. Point blank. I know, and I'm talking to a doctor right now. So let's talk about an accountant. Let's talk about a lawyer. Let's talk about someone who works in the financial services industry, whatever industry you're in. I think there's this hesitancy to talk about it. One of the reasons why we call our corporate office program that we do Same Here Safe is exactly what you just brought up. People don't feel safe bringing it up in an office. And that's the wall that we want to break down, that it can be talked about in an office and it can be a safe environment, right? But not everyone has that environment to be able to come up and where there's not opinions and judgments being made. So the first is, from a very extreme perspective, what is more important to you, that you live or that you work? Okay. And you don't need to look any further than that, because take it from someone who fell on their ass because they pushed themselves beyond that point of asking. And I only got to the point where I had to ask because it was my last resort. That you don't want to be spending 2.5 years in your bed, getting to the point where you can't move and you're dysfunctional, for you to then say, wow, I should have asked sooner. Okay. So that's piece number one. Now, piece number two, the reality of it. Let's use an athlete as an example. Robin Lehner is in our alliance, and Robin Lehner is the goalie for the Islanders, who won all these awards for being so open. And he's so open about his mental health that the reward that he gets the next year is only one other team outside of his own team is willing to sign him, and they're only willing to give this guy, who is the runner-up for the best goalie in the league, a 1-year deal. So we live in a reality where you can't sugarcoat it. You are going to be, unfortunately, in the majority of cases in 2020, you are going to be penalized unless you work for a salt of the earth, great organization that totally understands mental health, that not only understands mental health, that understands it in the way that what happened with Robin, that if you come in, if you explain that you need help, if they get you help, you can not only perform at expectations, you could perform above expectations. You're going to be hurt in your career. There's no other sugarcoating around it. So the question becomes, right? It's something that you need to weigh right now. I always counsel people, look, you get to the point where if you don't bring it up, you're going to fall apart. That means that you need to bring it up right now. Okay, so you bring it up. Your direct superior, person that you need to share it with, it's having the personal conversation with them. To me, I don't think you ever start with, I'm dealing with this thing called anxiety right now. That puts people directly, I'm dealing with this thing called depression right now. Puts people completely on guard. Instead, you start with what your story is, right? You start with what you've been through in life, because that's usually When I get celebrity athletes to join our alliance, it's not because I have a brand and a mission and something that we're doing. It's because I share what I've been through. When you share personally what you've been through, you create a safe space for someone else to open up back to you. And so the most successful that I've seen right now, until there's this paradigm shift, which is what we're working on to change the way in which industry looks at mental health, the only and best approach right now is to be your most honest self, to share what you've been through. You don't need to share your diagnosis. You don't need to share what your label is. But what you need to share is, based on these things that I've been through, here's where I'm at in terms of how I feel when I'm coming in the office. And I can't be the best employee for you that I can be. So, how can we make a plan that looks like this amount of time so that I can come back and not only work as well as I was working before, but be working even better? And
Yeah,
that's the best
yeah,
opportunity that you have to move forward from that point. And look,
I
there's going
love
to be
it.
jobs
Yeah,
that don't listen, like what's happening in the NHL. It's old school. If you're not mentally fully with it, that means you're mentally weak, and we're taking a chance on you that we can't take. Even though someone tears their ACL and they're one knee move away from re-tearing that, but they give that person a 5-year deal, why is Robin any more of a risk than any other player? Unfortunately, that's what we're still dealing with right now.
yeah. No, I think you explained that beautifully. And I think the other flip end to that question or that topic is, what about people that manage people? You know, a lot of you've got supervisors. You may not even see your boss, if you will, now in this remote world that we live in, but you see the people that report into you every day. And how do you even feel brave enough not only to have that conversation with your boss, but how do you have that conversation with people that work directly for you? So I think I think what you said there is not you're not putting a tag on it. You're just telling people some of the experiences that you've gone through. And I think Eric is doing amazing work in the workplace. That's why I wanted to ask him that question, because I know that he's gone into several companies with this message. So thank you so much. I did get one question for you, Eric.
Yeah.
How are you? How has your experience changed your view? You talked about careers, but relationships with people. Anything you can share on that? Anybody that's tuning in?
Of course. I mean, look, there's I could probably spend, I can talk forever. I could spend,
Oh,
hours talking about relationships and how they're impacted. The most surface level answer to that is, just like if you would be sick if you had cancer, diabetes, heart disease, you learn to who the people are who are in your corner, right? So once you share with people what you're going through, there's going to be people who are going to be there, are going to back you no matter what. And there's going to be people who are going to turn the other way and say that person's damaged. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story, because we both know Darren Ravel.
yeah.
When I first shared that story on LinkedIn and it got read 100,000 times, Darren, who I didn't know, reaches out to me and he says, "Hey, Eric, I've heard your name plenty of times before. Just read the story. It's really impactful. Would you mind if I shared it on my Twitter with a link to it?" And I said, "Absolutely. I'd love to help as many people as I can." And Darren's got 2 million followers. Obviously, not everyone's going to get it, but many people are going to see it. And so I remember speaking to my mother that night, a typical protective mom. And I was like, "Mom, Darren Ravel, is a sports reporter, shared it on his 2 million followers." And she's like, "He had no right to share that," right? Like, such a typical mother thing to
I
say.
went into mom mode. Yep, mom
Exactly.
mode.
And so, but therein lies my mom's thought was, how many people are not going to hire you? How many people are not going to want to work with you because you share what you shared? And I knew from the day that I shared, my philosophy was going to be, if 99% of this world disowns me and has nothing to do with me, I'm going to interact with the 1% of the people who will. I'll follow that up with saying, we launched an initiative in the sports industry that's called Same Here Solutions. It's a collaboration between us and a company called Sports Business Solutions. And one of the women who works for the LA Clippers is about to reveal her story on our platform. And I asked her, and as did Bob, who oversees Sports Business Solutions, "Does your boss know about this yet, what you're about to share?" And she said, "No." He said, "Is there any concern that you have? We want to make sure that everything's out on the table, that if you share this, your boss is going to react a certain way." And she looked at us and she said, "If my boss doesn't react the way that I expect him to, That's not the boss I want to work for.
Mm,
And that's coming
yeah,
from someone who's got a dream job as a manager of a very, serious team in professional sports, that her job could go away, that she doesn't want to work for those
yeah,
people. That's number one. The other side of the relationship piece I just want to add is I've learned not to judge people as much as I did before based on their actions. It's very easy to meet someone and say that person's an asshole. That person is not friendly. That person's not a good person. What you learn when you study mental health and you find out more is that you find out someone's behavior is based on their feelings. Their feelings are based on things that have happened to them in the past. So, using that as a chain of events, let's talk about a kid in school. A kid in school, this is a very simplified example, but kid in school is eating Cheerios before going to class, hearing their parents fight in the background, crying over those Cheerios. The parents don't see that the child's crying. The child goes into school after that because they're brought to the bus after the parents kind of just, level everything's off and bring the child to the bus. The child goes into first period. The child is thinking about the fight that they just witnessed, worrying about, are my parents going to get divorced? Are my parents really going to ever love each other again? Now that child starts acting out in class because all these thoughts are running through their mind. And what does Miss Smith, the teacher, think? Jimmy's a bad student. They're not listening to my lesson plan. That's not the answer.
yeah,
In most cases, that's not the answer. In most cases, the behavior is based on a difficult feeling that the person has from a difficult experience that they went through. And so having a greater understanding of that and being more patient with people and know that they've been through difficult times, I think that's a really important takeaway for us when it comes to
yeah.
relationships.
I love that, and I think what you talked about is the answer: is you live your truth, and the people that love you and embrace you, they'll be there for you, and as long as you're authentic to yourself, and I think that's key, and thank you for summarizing that so everybody can comprehend that in an easy way. The other thing I wanted to talk about and try to get through a few more things. Are you okay if we
Sure.
go a little over an
Yeah,
hour?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay. So the other thing you spoke about was taking the time, and it may not even have to get to the point where you're really struggling with some mental health issues, but it really resonated with me where you talked about just sitting down and thinking about some of the trauma that we've been through. In my book, and that was my therapeutic way of dealing with it. I wrote about my tragedies in my life, and I wrote about my happiness in my life as well. But I think I've been public as well about my brother, and his battle with paranoid schizophrenia, my childhood best friend, and how he took his life, and then tragically losing my father when I had seen him the day before in a car accident a quarter mile from his house. And I say in the book, although years separated each instance, it still felt like a barrage of uppercuts to my soul.
Hmm.
And I think what you said there about taking a breath, taking the time to sit back, and when you do struggle or you feel your mental health shifting, you got to acknowledge that you've probably been through quite a bit of, as you say, trauma, over your lifetime, and things build. I feel like even though, again, there may be years between each circumstance, it could take us years before we get over something and learn how to deal with something, and then the next thing happens. And really just kind of reflecting on that. So thank you for bringing that up, because I don't think a lot of people dig deep into the closet to think about things. Sometimes you go, wow, I life is so fast paced. I didn't even remember that tragic thing that happened to me when I was a child, and how it could impact me today. So I just wanted to call that out. Thank you so much, Eric,
Yeah,
for
no,
bringing
I
that to
mean,
the
what
show.
you're describing, like I try to tell people that think of your brain as a movie camera that has digital, capabilities to be able to store the information. That information never goes away, and yet we're taught all these cliches in life, like forget the last play and move on to the next one when we play sports, or time is the greatest healer, right?
Yeah,
All those things are bullshit. The
yeah,
truth of the matter is the stuff that happens to us in our life is recorded, stays in there, and doesn't go away unless we deal with it. It's like
yeah,
having a bag of clothes that are the dirty clothes from our hamper that we're carrying around. That dirty bag of clothes doesn't get lighter just because time goes by and we're walking around with it. In fact, it gets heavier. The
yeah,
only way it gets lighter is if we reach in the bag, we actually take the clothes out, we put it in the washing machine, we wash it, we fold it, and then we put it on our shelf. And so I think the common misconception is, oh, in your case, using an example, and you've been through a lot of stuff that's not to be skipped over. My father passed away, or I lost my friend to suicide, or my brother's been really sick over many years. Those are things that build up. And the best analogy I can make from a physical health standpoint, I try to do this every time that I talk with a group, because I think it's the easiest way for us to understand something that we cannot see, is that we've accepted as a society from a physical health standpoint that this stuff called plaque builds silently in our arteries and can take us down with a heart attack or a stroke. That's been an accepted thing for many years. We teach kids jump rope for heart so they know to take care of their heart health. We go on the treadmill, we eat salads, and we try to do things to get that plaque to not build up the way that it can. Well, guess what? Stress and trauma build up inside of us. If we're eating bad foods and they accumulate inside of us, well, watching a father pass away, watching a friend die by suicide, watching a brother go through paranoid schizophrenia is like eating cheeseburgers for our brain, for our central nervous system. That stuff isn't stuff that in time gets better and just goes away. It's stuff that we have to unpack and work on.
Yeah, thank you. And we're getting a lot of people saying just thank you, very well explained. It's like a DVR. Your mind is like a DVR, how you explained it there. So a lot of people, this is resonating with everybody. Another Adam, well said. So real quickly, so I just want to also really compliment you before we dive into the next topic, and we'll try to move through this. I know I can't believe we're over an hour already. Feels like
we had a 4-minute break in the beginning.
We did. So we'll take that into consideration. But the one thing that I wanted to mention about Eric, and many people have said this that I know that have reached out to you, you're accessible. And we talked about, and I've even dealt with other mental health nonprofits and things of that nature, and why I've connected with you and Same Here Global and your mission and your organization, and why I constantly talk about it, because I think you lead by example. And I just want everybody to know out there, Eric responds back. So I've dealt with other people, and I don't want to put the pressure on you where you're getting, hundreds of people reaching out, but when you can, you respond to people and you're authentic and you're there for people. And I think it's important because you've got quite a big alliance and quite a big network of, we've talked about celebrities and professional athletes, and you're a busy man. I mean, I've been on the phone with you where you'll pick up and you're like, I've got an NBA team on the other line, or, but you pick up the phone and you connect with people, and what you do is authentic and true and real. So I just wanted to throw that out there to everybody. Not necessarily to start reaching out to you, but I think it's important that you do set the tone there, and embrace that and embrace people. So I just wanted to, that was in my notes. You didn't know I was going to say that, but thank you. All right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is COVID-19. It's in the news. We could spend an hour just talking about this. I think people's mental health is being tested like it has never been tested before. You talk about layering on all of the other traumas that we've been through. People are losing their job. They're going on furlough. There are millions of different scenarios that are playing out right now. You've got, this is going to stream on my page, my author page. Hopefully this is going to reach hundreds of people. What's the one, I don't even want to say bit of advice, but how can you guide us to better deal with everything that's going on right now? What would you say to everybody out there that is really starting to go through, this is wearing on people? We're going into week 3 and week 4 of this, where we've been isolated. What are you telling people when they reach out to you about this?
I think the fascinating thing, what's happening, because it's happening to the whole world at the same time right now, is rewind 3 weeks ago before any of this happened to this level, and we were all at the office. Our perception of how we were was, I'm healthy, fine, and okay. And the reason for that is, and I'm not downplaying how much fear there is about, I might be one of the ones who get it. A family might be one of the ones who get it. What's going to happen to my job? Those what ifs are all scary. Don't get me wrong. The bigger factor that people aren't considering that has really changed between 3 weeks ago and right now is that the distractions, and I'm going to use that term very, very boldly, the distractions that we put around us in our lives are no longer there for us. So we're left with our bare
Yeah.
selves. Okay.
Yep.
So work is a distraction, even though it's a good distraction most of the time. Watching sports on TV is a distraction. Being able to gamble on those sports is a distraction. Okay. Being able to go out and meet people easily for dates or go out with our husband or wives is a distraction. Okay. Sending our kids to school and having that free time is a distraction. Okay. All those things are gone right now. We don't have the ability to do those. And there's only so much we can do with the same distraction of going back to Netflix, watching the same thing over and over again. So the fascinating thing I think right now for people to understand is, yes, there's extra angst from all of the unknowns and the what ifs. But the bigger thing I think what's happening right now, why people are feeling more and more angst, is all these things that lie beneath the surface that we've spoken about, all the things that you discussed that have happened in your life. I have friends who are calling me and saying, this thing that I went through in high school where my friends were picking on me when I was 17 years old is resurfacing and coming at me out of nowhere. I don't know where this is coming from. So, this mishmash that we're feeling right now, most of us, the easiest thing to attribute it to and to point to is, oh my God, COVID's going on. I got to get a mask. I got to get enough toilet paper. I got to make sure I don't get this. I got to wash my hands a million times. I got to make sure that my parents are okay or that my grandparents are okay. All those things are valid and all those things are true. But also, the thing to remember is, for the first time in our lives, for an extended period of time, because most of us, when we start working, we work and then we work until the day that we retire, is we're being given this time period to be with ourselves and for things to surface up. And things that we haven't had the energy to deal with are starting to now come into our conscious mind. And so that's scary and that's difficult, but it's also an opportunity, because in it being an opportunity, like you were mentioning before, how much of that you think about now, well, that can take you down if you're obsessing over it. But take something as simple as, without going into, which maybe we'll go into later, the strategies of how to deal with these things. What if you take out a notebook and you just write down these thoughts that are coming to your mind? So instead of them living in here and circulating in here, you're putting them down on a piece of paper. I have a lot of people who've called me and said, Eric, I don't have a very strong friends network. I don't have people that I could just open up and talk to these things about. Okay, that's a real scenario for a lot of people. Fine. Your best friend is your notebook for right now. Okay, that might seem, oh, that woe is me, but your best friend can be that notebook where you're putting those things down in there. The act of taking things from here, from our central nervous system, and placing them there is extremely healthy. It doesn't mean we need to obsess over the thought and write the same thing every day, but as a new thought arises, as a new memory arises, put that in another place. So I think that's the biggest thing for me with what's going on with COVID is, I think we're attributing the anxiety that we're feeling exclusively to what's happening in the now. And it's so much broader than that, but it allows us an opportunity to actually work on our whole self.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't even thought of that perspective. You're right. I mean, we've got, especially I'm thinking about people that don't have a family. I'm lucky. A lot of us are lucky. We've got kids running around. We've got a spouse. So we've got people taking our mind off of things. But what about, people out there? They're, especially, could be older, younger, doesn't matter. They're in the house by themselves. So you're right, Eric. I think writing your thoughts down and how you're feeling can be very therapeutic and a great way to deal with things. Continue to everybody out there, if you've got questions for Eric, certainly please. I've got a lot of comments on here, but please feel free to reach out here and ask questions as we go along. So the next question or kind of topic that I wanted to cover with you real quickly was just want everybody to know out there how I'm going to be supporting here, and the same here, global movement coming up in May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. I just wanted to let everybody know I am going to be So my book, The Magic of Mayfair, I'm going to be donating all online sales to Eric's organization, which means a lot to me. And it's a very tangible way for me to give back in honor of my best friend, Bill Ganji, in honor of my brother, Eric Shapiro, and even my father, who, he passed in a car accident, but he was still dealing with quite a bit of mental health issues, losing his job, not being able to kind of come to terms with the fact that he was past his prime and he was really suffering as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all online platforms. What leads me into that, and why I bring that up, Eric, and why it's so important to give what we can and really support your organization, is I just wanted to talk about some of the work, and I know we're over time here, but if you don't mind, the school programs. That is what hit home with me. I have two young children. My brother started with his, I call it kind of, in my book, I say his reckless behavior, if you will. It started at a younger age, 14, 15 years old. I think that I love that your organization and you personally are committed to going into schools and early and getting them to understand what all these different emotions are. I saw you had sent me some of your slides, and you lay it out in such an a very digestible way. Could you talk a little bit and let everyone know out there just what you're doing around your school programs in regards to really getting to the youth at a really young and vulnerable age? I think that's huge. I think everybody should know about that.
Yeah, so the Same Here Schools is the name of the program. Easy on the alliteration there. There's a woman, Joanne Lagande, who's the principal of Dodd Middle School in Freeport, Long Island, and she's our director of Same Here Schools programming. So I want to give her a lot of credit and a shout out for what we built. But I look at it as K through 12, and I look at it as there's no age that's too young in K through 12 for us to have this conversation. Um, Before I go into the nitty gritty of like an example of working with these schools and these different kids at different ages, I look at the school community and I look at it as there's so many programs out there that have a school curriculum and that's it. They have a workbook and that's it. They have this social and emotional learning playroom and that's it. I don't think you can make change happen in a school community unless you engage all stakeholders and unless you use a rallying cry that everyone together feels like they're on the same page with, if you really want to change the way in which the dynamic in the school community communicates about this topic. It's got to be a fully integrated program. So I'll start with the fact that Same Here is that rallying cry, right? We begin with an assembly program for either the entire school where it's all students, or in some cases like Smithtown West, I did 4 different assemblies for their high school for their 4 different grades all in one day, right? And it's the same program, but you're bringing them through that. The idea behind that assembly program is to lay the foundation for this concept of 5 and 5, everyone facing challenges. What do those challenges look like? From there, we then do our breakout sessions. So our breakout sessions look like different things for the different stakeholders. For teachers, it's identifying students, what some of their challenges are, explaining to them some of the things that we were speaking about before about where does behavior come from. It's having a plan when a student is dealing with a challenge. How do we face that? How do we is there a plan in place normally within the school for how we react to a situation like that so it doesn't become a crisis situation? I think you and I grew up in the era of you're talking too loud, so your seat gets moved next to the teacher's desk, and that's how you're punished, and you're supposed to get better because of that. That's not the right way to help a student get better, right? We work with students on building student-led mental health clubs, helping them form a name that's an empowerment name. Like if their mascot is the Broncos, we call it Bronco Bold. If their mascot is the Tigers, we call it Own Your Roar, right? So it's an empowerment brand. So it's not just about mental health in the literal sense. It's about us owning who we are and what we're about. It's school curriculum that we've created online, that we work with a partner that we have that's called Beluga. where it's 18 different modules that takes them through everything from what emotions are to what happens in our brain to what are some life experiences that we're all challenged with to how do we share our stories. And by the way, disorder is a piece of that conversation, but it's not the focus of that curriculum or conversation. And we're very specific to lead with that to make sure that people understand same here is what we're leading with. Our common life challenges are what we're leading with. Disorder is just one place on this mental health continuum. Then within schools, we created this tool that's now an app that's called the Same Here Scale, where there's 6 different places on that scale that anyone could land on any given day, week, month, year. And it goes from thriving to gliding to surviving to fluctuating to struggling to sinking. And there's 6 places on that continuum that any student can be on. And it's purposely 6 because if we had a 7th one, that would be a middle one, and that would be the choice that every student would pick. I'm in the middle, I'm okay, I'm fine, and no conversation would open from there. So we're giving teachers, students, parents, even these tools to be able to open up and have these conversations. So now that I've given kind of the broad overstroke, I'll just say some of the most rewarding things are, going to Guggenheim Elementary School in Port Washington and having a room full of 2nd through 5th graders sitting on the floor where they have their boards that they're able to write on, their clipboards with, I gave them a Same Here hand in the middle that they got to write their name under, and then they each had 4 circles. And after I shared my story, because you have to be different with how you deal with it and you discuss it with each age group,
Sure.
I asked the kids, I said, listen, I just shared some of my challenges. I gave you examples of challenges. What are some of the challenges you've dealt with? And by the way, none of you have to share. If not a single person in this room of 500 of you shares, that's totally okay. This is for you and your paper to put that down.
Mm-hmm.
So they all start sharing. And then I said, is there anyone who is comfortable sharing and raising their hand? Before you know it, hands are going up. They all want to share. First kid I go up to, what do you want to share? I lost 3 of my pets this year and it made me really sad. Okay.
Mm.
The second that kid shares that, you see 300 of these 500 kids jumping up from their seats saying, my pet passed away too, and I'm really sad about it. And that happened 3 times over. Someone shared the passing of their aunt. Someone shared how difficult it was moving to a new town, living in Port Washington. And each of these kids followed each other, raising their hand at the same time. And what it really brought up to me was that as human beings, we have this desire to want to fit in, to want to relate, to want to connect with one another, that when we get to this junior high-ish age, we become too cool for school. And now it's no longer cool for me to share that weakness that I have. I got to hold that in and not show that to people. But what's deeply ingrained in our fabric is when we open up and share, we actually want to show other people that we've been through the same thing. And so we're just trying to reverse engineer this world where it becomes normal for us to open up and share, because that's a wonderful place to be when it's like that.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that, I'm going to also share this discussion on the Stoneman Douglas. I'm a graduate of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, and quite a few alumni are going to be seeing this. We've got almost 2,000 people Douglas group that I created. So I think it's important that everybody knows that you are, again, going into schools and supporting the youth. And I think that's huge. And that's where you can make a difference.
North in our prep like a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, you were telling me. That's awesome. And I never made it to the Stoneman Douglas event because of COVID, but I will definitely be back next year. But mental health, obviously, we've probably got quite a few alumni watching right now from my high school. And again, we'll share this on the Stoneman Douglas page as well. So I thought that was important. Eric, real quickly, so I just want to make sure I'm giving the right website. Can you let everyone know what your website is? Because it's really interactive. There's a lot of stuff on there, a lot of things you can click on. I was on there last night. I mean, I probably spent 40 minutes on there. So can you just let everyone know where they can get more information?
What we've migrated toward, just because the campaign name is what we're leading with, is, and it's easy to remember, samehereglobal.org. You don't need the underscore like you do with the social channels with Twitter and Instagram. we're most active on Instagram with the @SameHere_global, but the actual website, I think what you're talking about, and painstakingly, I had to build that because when you're bootstrapping a business to start off,
Sure.
you learn how to do things that you didn't know how to do before. So I learned WordPress and building those pages. So the way that it's structured so that people can find things is we have celebrities who shared their stories on their own inside pages of challenges that they faced. Then we've got practitioners that teach different types of stress and trauma release practices. We call them STAR, stress and trauma, active release and rewiring. And then we've got influencers like Darren Ravel who share their stories. We've got everyday heroes who share their stories, so everyday people. And then we've got blog posts and we've got programs. So for anyone who's looking for things like doing things in schools, doing things in colleges, doing things in offices, doing things with first responders, doing things with sports teams and leagues, we set that up so that each one of these programs speaks to each of those different demographic groups, so that we can take this message of 5 and 5 but cater it to each of those individual communities so it speaks specifically to them.
That's great. Yeah. And I definitely want to encourage everybody to please check that out. Before we talk about, and I know we need to wrap this up, even though I would love to keep going. Maybe we'll do another, hopefully we can do another one of these, because the feedback that I'm seeing on here is fantastic. Got a lot of sports fans that are going to be watching this, that are going to be seeing this. Can you highlight again two things? I think it's important why I love this organization. You talked about everyday heroes. You talked about people, and just so everyone knows, Eric highlights again everyday people. You can go on there, and I think that's what's so powerful about this is you can just read about somebody that you don't know, and the fact that they're being brave, they're going on, they're telling their story. So I think that's an important thing that everybody needs to know is that you're not just listing, the professional athletes. You're not forgetting about the everyday people. So thank you for including that in your page. I think it's important everyone checks that out. Who are some of the people that come to mind real quickly? Again, we've got quite a few sports fans and people that are probably going to know a lot of these individuals. And I think it's cool when people can take a name and also kind of align that with the whole topic around our mental health. So who are some that jump out at you?
Yeah. So the first guy that I ever reached out to that joined is a guy named Theo Flurry. People from this area might know him because he played for the Rangers for a little bit. Most known for winning a Stanley Cup his first year with the Calgary Flames. His story is incredible. He was straight male who was raped by his male coach, who was known as a god in Canada, this coach, over 150 times when he was 15, 16 years old. Theo never told anyone about it, goes through his career, is looked at as like the Napoleon type of player, shorter guy who gets on people's nerves. People don't love playing against him unless you're on his team, and was drinking, smoking, drugging, hookering, gambling every piece of his money away because he needed those vices to get through every day. And talk about work being a distraction. His hockey was his distraction also. Well, his hockey career ends. He's got none of his money left. And this wasn't because he had none of his money left, it's because he had no more of his distractions left. He's got a gun rattling in his mouth in his house in New Mexico about to blow his head off because he didn't know how to live life on life's terms. And he ends up deciding, I've never quit anything before in my life. He throws his gun into the desert where his house is in the middle of the desert, and he decides to go on this discovery mission about his life and learn how to live life on life's terms. Meets some incredible practitioners. A woman named Kim Barthel, who's on our Practitioner Alliance, writes a book called Playing with Fire. And the actual genesis of the Same Here sign was from Theo telling me a story. I think a lot of people will this will resonate with them, as if I had the right to ask Theo Flurry this question when I was coming up with the idea of putting together an alliance of athletes and celebrities to talk about this collectively. I said, Theo, I want to know I'm working with the right person or the right people. Would you give up your favorite NHL goal to save someone's life? And without hesitation, he responds back and he says, Eric, I would give up my Olympic gold medal and my Stanley Cup ring just to change one person's life. And he was like, I played hockey to give me a platform to be able to help people. When I heard that, I was like, that's the type of guy I want to work
Wow.
with. Um,
Wow.
then you take a look at, I'll give some love to the female athletes and female celebrities that we have in our alliance. Someone who's become a great friend of mine, Shamika Holtzclaw, who arguably is the best female basketball player, certainly in college, but potentially even pro of all time. Loss of her grandmother sends her into this spiral, into this spin, and she's having psychotic breaks and finding herself at different places, wandering streets. And it shows how someone can fall from grace. She had such a incredible influence in her life, and Pat Summitt, this coach in college, and even with that incredible influence, this is before Pat got sick and we lost her. You know, Shamika goes through these challenging life experiences, like the loss of her grandmother, and look at how it spins her out of control, and suicidal ideations and the nines. And so the reason we share the celebrities, you mentioned the everyday heroes, is not because we think the celebrities are any more important than anyone else. It's because what it does is it shows the rest of us that celebrities are everyday people.
Yeah.
By listing their stories, we're
Yep.
able to see that life affects them just like it affects us. And just because they make millions of dollars or play in front of millions of people and they look like they have it all together, that's not necessarily the case in most of the cases. And if they hold it together like a Tom Brady does, you can be sure that Tom Brady has shit that he deals with. And even though he plays the part of this perfect robot, there's stuff that he goes to bed with at night that bothers him, right? And so that means that none of us are alone. We're all part of this same 5 and 5 group that we all deal with shit, and that makes it a beautiful story instead of a
Yeah.
story of woe is me.
Yep. Yeah, and the everyday hero stories are unbelievable, and that's why I wanted everybody to know it's a great mix of, to your point, celebrities, pro athletes. Check it out on the page. You got surprised when I looked through, and Eric, they're not only professional athletes from this country. I noticed they're from all over the world, which again is really highlighting the global piece to everything that you're doing. So definitely an interesting part of the site. The last thing I wanted to wrap up with, um, Adam, thanks. You got people, Eric, just thanking you for sharing all this information tonight,
A pleasure, man.
and how useful this is. So it's not your typical 2020, of course, as we kind of head into the month of April. But what's next for Same Here Global? How are you adapting to this kind of remote network? I'm sure you're continuing to do interviews and press and things like that, but you're doing it a different way. But what's on the horizon? How are you doing things a little bit differently? What can we see? And how are you kind of adapting to this changing world here, but still getting your message out?
The interesting thing is, like, my switch from sports to this, I wasn't going into an office 9 to 5 anymore. So like this change in routine that everyone else is having to deal with is kind of like it's commonplace to me right now. So in one hand, it's not hurting me too much in that way. Certainly the cancellation or the postponement of events is difficult, right? And so certainly it's setting up calls, it's setting up Zoom sessions with groups and helping them in those ways. Um, a lot of what we were working on were the tools that we can help people with. So we just added a guy named Dr. Stephen C. Hayes, who's probably one of the most world-renowned psychologists when it comes to he created ACT therapy, which is one of the most known therapies, just like a CBT or DBT that's out there. So it's constantly networking, it's constantly reaching out, it's constantly building our alliances, it's constantly getting more people involved. What I share with my team all the time is what we're building a forest, and we're planting little trees that those trees eventually build up. And when you see a forest of tiny planted trees from a 30,000-foot view, those trees wouldn't amount to much because you're just seeing these tiny little trees sparsed out all over the place. As you're building a CEO alliance, because you're getting people who are titans of industry to buy into this same here concept, as you're building a same here psych alliance of psychiatrists and psychologists who believe in this concept of integrative work. And same here, as you're building a documentary series you were talking about before, we do have two Emmy award winning producers who are working on this concept of 5 and 5 and showing this list of celebrities all the way to everyday people and how we all face challenges similarly. The app that I'm talking about with the schools and getting that Same Here Scale app more and more readily available to schools. So these little trees that are planted, the world doesn't stop just because I can't do my events. I'll do the events the best that I can online. And from a revenue perspective, that's not ever the reason why I got in this. I think one of the advantages of being a single dude without a family yet is that I don't have these high expenses that I have to worry about right now. So certainly, like any other business, and the nonprofit is a business, you take your lumps in that, the events that you had were canceled. But to me, this is a labor of love and something that I'm passionate about, helping people regardless of how that looks like. So I'm spending my time continuing to build those relationships, continuing to build those platforms. And then I think the interesting thing about this space is when we do get back to somewhat of a level of normalcy, the world is going to open up to the idea that, holy shit, mental health is something we actually have to work on and have to proactively manage. Whereas before we just pushed it to the side and didn't worry about it. You're going to be forced as an organization. If you want to survive, if you want to hire the best employees, if you want to recruit the best employees, you're not going to be able to do it unless you have a mental health program in place. And so I think whatever we lose now in terms of direct one-on-one counseling or direct 1 to 3,000 counseling when we go and we do a program, we're going to more than make up for as the floodgates open and our society returns back to normal.
Absolutely. That question is because a lot of people are going through that. As we wrap up here, you're adapting, and I think that's what we need to do. Is how can you leverage technology? How can you leverage resources? I think it's something that we're all going through right now, especially if you own your own business. How can you do things differently? How can you adapt to the ever-changing world that is happening and literally changing by the day? Before we wrap up here, I just wanted everybody to know locally, Eric talked about events, and unfortunately, Eric and I are planning to do something in Livingston, New Jersey. So we're gonna have a lot of people watch this that live in the town of Livingston. I wish everybody could come in when we do have this event, but more details to follow. So I'm excited once kind of the dust settles a little bit and we kind of get back to some type of normalcy. There is something big that we're planning that I'm super excited about locally. But Eric, really, I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's amazing. It's going to go to Treemouth Books, my author page. This is going to be on my personal page, and I'm so excited to get this posted on the Stoneman Douglas networking group that we have as well. So a lot of people are going to see this. Anything that you want to say before we wrap up, Eric, on your end?
I just, speaking of the Stoneman Douglas people, it breaks my heart, obviously, what they've been through. And what the message that I want to get out to those folks, working for the Panthers, seeing how Roberto Luongo, when he was playing, addressed the crowd and essentially addressed the world with his words, is when we go through traumatic experiences and we witness those things, we might not be the ones who are shot at, right? And I know this is a very scary, direct topic to talk about, but you look at what police officers watch every single day when they go onto crime scenes, and they have mothers who are screaming and crying and fathers who are screaming and crying and kids who've been named in certain, tragedies and things like that. There's something called vicarious trauma that we all live through when we see things. And what I want to tell the Stoneman Douglas community is, we might not have lived through a mass shooting directly and being in that school, but what I want you to feel in terms of a sense of community is we've all dealt with traumatic events and we all understand how trauma impacts us. And what I want you all to think about is that trauma lives inside you, just like all these things that we've been discussing, like you were discussing personally with your family, like I was discussing personally with our family. It's so important for us to work those things out of our system. And so one, for the Stoneman Douglas family to think about that and to continue to work those things out of our system, but two, how that then and those experiences compare to what the rest of us face in challenges. It's different levels, it's different experiences in terms of what those traumas are, but at the end of the day, trauma and chronic stress build up in us, and those are things we need to work on. So let's hold hands and let's share and let's work through it together, as opposed to looking at it like, these people went through this, these people went through this, they can't possibly understand what I've been through, so I can't connect with those people. I think we have a world of people out there that can learn from each other's stories and can heal from each other's stories, and that's where we need to get to.
Awesome. Awesome. So there's a message for the Eagle family from Eric. So we appreciate you definitely talking about that and sending a specialized message to that school. Would be amazing one day if we can get you there to speak to all of the students. So I think it would be a treat to be able to hopefully get that done at some point. So I just want to wrap up. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate it. We went way over. I can't believe that we're up to almost an hour and 40 minutes because going here, but everybody thanks you. We got a lot of comments tonight, and we appreciate everything you're doing. And please check out Eric's network. Go online, go through all the different materials on the site. It's definitely worth it. So Eric, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and we'll talk soon. Have a great night.
Man. Really appreciate it.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Okay, bye.
Bye.